break that down a little bit. So when you say the neurocentric approach, explain to people what's happening in the brain when you see something there, and it's like I have to manipulate this thing from there to there or there to there. Like what's going on, and how is that thing different for me, you, and Georgia?
Yeah, so it's a term that I actually kind of draw from Philip Snell. And Philip Snell's a chiropractor. He's brilliant when it comes to spines. And he was looking at it from, like, when he says neurocentric, he was kind of saying it from the lens of, like, peripheral nervous system, discogenic issues and osteogenic issues. And, the nervous system's kind of neurodynamics that's always involved. When I say neurocentric, I'm always considering that. If you have really poor nerve, mobility, you're probably going to not be able to go overhead very well or do well at deadlifts or whatever. But I'm also considering the central nervous system, so the hypothalamic pituitary organ axis, so not just like the adrenal axis, the thyroid axis, the gonadal axis, but I'm considering how the brain is talking to the body. So thyroid hormones, stress hormones, sex hormones, anything like that, that's impacted by fitness. And so anytime that I push the nervous system, I need to be aware that there are days I have to not push the nervous system. Mm-hmm. So metabolic conditioning can be really intense on the nervous system. I mean, anyone that's ever done a 2K row time trial with any semblance of real power, a 2K row in like 6:15, ow, that hurts. Like, that is excruciating, and that's going to impact your nervous system dramatically. But a 2K row at, let's say, 9 minutes, even if that's your max effort, that's not going to really drain your nervous system as much because you're just not strong enough to like feel pain. And so when I look at biomechanics, I consider that in the nervous system as well. Like, if you are a great squatter, you can squat so much more frequently. Look at Olympic lifters. They squat like every day, but they're also really good at squatting. Imagine trying to give somebody that has horrible squat mechanics squatting 3 times a week or
Not
squatting
horrible.
4 times a
Just
week.
put my hand up.
Just not ideal, not horrible.
Yes.
Though.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Like, you think about that. Like, how would you feel recovery-wise, overall, just everything-wise, if you were to go and squat with some real mental intent 3-4 times a week? Oh, it can crush your soul. So considering biomechanics, that's why I look at movement screens. So when I look at a movement, I don't pass fail because movement is so much more complex than that. So I look at it and I go, okay, well, you're not a great squatter. Like, whether I use CCP principles or if I go with the FMS or SFMA or any organization out there that looks at squats, I just look at that and I go, well, that looks like it's hard on your brain. Like, it just looks like it's not easy. And so if I give you high volume of that, that could really drain you. And so I need to be aware of that in the program design. And so then you mix that in with like outside activities like BJJ or Muay Thai or boxing or anything.
But what you just said, you have to have a very advanced brain to be able to do that, right? Like, you look at someone do a movement and you're like, you can understand, like, that's very taxing on your brain, right? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? So like someone that's watching and they're like, I want to get into fitness tomorrow. It's like, that's not an approach that person should take.
Correct.
Because that's based on, all of your years of experience and your
reps.
knowledge. And yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So I just wanted to be clear there so people aren't like, oh, I like that concept, I want to use that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's something that I probably get yelled at for saying it, but that's why I say, like, you shouldn't be a remote coach unless you have 10,000 hours of in-person training. Like, if you just started coaching a year ago, and I get it, COVID, pandemic, people, gym shut down, you got to pay bills, I get it. And so it's not like I'm saying don't remote coach,
Yeah.
but don't be a full-time remote coach if you haven't done 10,000 movement assessments. Before I even got to OPEX, Big Dogs, whatever, OPT, I had done 12,000 FMSs, legitimately 12,000. I did about 250 to 300 a month for years. And I collected all that data, and it was the reps. So back to the kind of concept of like working the fundamentals, Go practice the basics 10,000 plus times, and you'll start to see things. And you'll see it in people. You'll be like, that just looks like it doesn't feel good. And then you ask questions like, hey, how'd that feel? Man, I don't know. I'm not like winded, but I just need a nap. Like, when you watch me, when I was competing in Olympic lifting, you watch me do a snatch deadlift. Can I have straps? Like, just strapping helps me not need a nap. But after, 5 reps, I'm like, oh man, I know it was only 80 kilos, but I'm going to go sit down for 5 minutes. Whereas I could back squat all the time. So when I take that approach with program design for like jiu-jitsu or fighting, I take that neurocentric approach. So I ask questions like, hey man, so like, what are you doing on Mondays with your training? Well, we do 2 hours of wrestling, and then I go back and then I take, the white belt class or the blue belts or whatever. I'm like rolling with a bunch of, black belts or whatever. And they exhaust me, and it's a lot of like hard rolling. We don't just drill. Okay, great. So that's an intense day. You got a lot of wrestling and hard rolling in the afternoon. Tuesday's training, back squat, EMOM, 10 minutes times 3 at 60%. Like easy day, right? Like let's just give you a little bit. Whereas if they're like, oh yeah, we just drill for an hour and a half, it's super easy. It's just kind of like welcoming back into the week and blah, blah, blah. Okay, great, awesome. So let's do Tuesday, higher intensity stuff. They'll do a 5 rep max or whatever. So the neurocentric approach to me is looking at everything in life that impacts your nervous system. So that's where I like look at HRV, whether it's Whoop, Morpheus, Oura Ring, Apple Watch even, can look at HRV. I look at those patterns and I just say, okay, well, you did this. The next day your HRV was really bad. Maybe that's intense. And that doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means we recognize that we don't do that, 2 days in a row. Mm-hmm. And so I start tracking things like that, because if the nervous system typically goes before hormones. You don't just go do Fran and all of a sudden your testosterone is lower. You do Fran every single day and now your testosterone is lower. And so that's how I kind of take the approach. But I also use a lot of like blood work and other, testing methods to kind of figure out where people sit on that. But if there's like one piece of advice I can give coaches is just remember that the nervous system is king. Like it's absolutely the king of everything. But happy wife, happy life. And so that means you got to look at gut health. You got to look at nutrition. You got to look at basic movement principles. Like, hey, if you can't do a decent squat, then you're spending more energy to move. If your torso is like perpendicular or parallel to the ground and you're squatting, you're spending more energy just to do the movement. And it's kind of like jiu-jitsu. Like, the bigger your movements, the more energy you spend. Like, refine it, get in tighter, like get your underhook. Don't just get your underhook and, refine it. And it's the same thing with coaching and fitness and movement. Like, you just want to make sure that you're spending the least amount of energy. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the neurocentric approach for me comes into play.